it applies to politicians as well, right? Nobody wants to take career risk. And they don't yet understand that not adopting Bitcoin is the career risk now. And that's what we're trying to educate them on. But by and large, they all are waiting for when from their perspective, it's zero career risk. And by definition, that means the US has not just done the executive order, but passed the Bitcoin Act and is actively accumulating. And Bitcoin is now at 500,000 or 0.5 M. That's when they think it's zero career risk. So it could be that we have to wait for that to happen before everyone piles on. And I think when that happens and everyone piles on, that's when you shoot up to 1 million or 10 a coin. Because nobody wants Bitcoin when it's at 80. Maybe not even at 108. Maybe not even at 200. They want it at 0.5.
Samson Mow, CEO of JAN3, warns that the real risk lies in ignoring Bitcoin, not embracing it. While many wait for regulatory clarity, like a Bitcoin Act or executive order, and a price point around $500,000, by then, the major gains will be over. The trend shows people wait too long, buying only when it feels safe, missing the early profits. Mow predicts $1 million Bitcoin is coming, and the time to act may be now. Stick around and watch this next clip where Mow shares more insights into Bitcoin adoption. Also, if you enjoy listening to crypto-related content, please show your support by liking and subscribing to this channel by following the link in my bio, and get access to my free daily crypto updates and expert predictions direct to your inbox. Each newsletter contains on-chain data, forecasts and expert predictions. All of this is available free of charge. It only takes a moment to sign up and you can always change your mind later. Now back over to Samson Mow.
The other thing I think is a very big component of it is people think that there's more supply than there is, because we always say that there's only 21 million. The supply on the exchanges is going down. But then the counterpoint I see shot back is, well, then why is the price dropping? Right? But this has nothing to do with the supply. It's just people have to sell sometimes for various reasons. They could be liquidated. They could be deleveraging. They could be doing any number of things, or they're just panicking, plainly. But the supply is dwindling, and I think that has to reconcile itself eventually. There are only 21 million coins. Several million are probably lost. Sailor has 500K. The ETFs have 1 point something million. And then Cynthia Lummis wants to buy 1 million. And if they launch the bit bonds, the ones designed by, sorry, I forgot the name, but the one for issuing $2 trillion of debt with 10% allocated to Bitcoin, that's $200 billion of Bitcoin, which is some 3 million some odd Bitcoin that they want to buy. That's really not sustainable. And even if you look at Sailor alone, he's taken off multiple times the amount of Bitcoin that will be mined this year. Just him alone, not counting everybody else. So Bitcoin is really already deflationary if you look at it from that perspective. So it just doesn't compute. And I think when things like this don't compute, it means that there's going to be a very fast reconciliation at some point, which is the Omega candle and a fast run to 1 million. The proposal was for the US government to issue debt that is backed by Bitcoin, 10% allocated to Bitcoin, and you get paid 1% interest. And there is a boost in the coupon payment up to 4.5%, I believe. And that's capped off with the Bitcoin gains. And it's just a way to secure US debt with Bitcoin, similar to the Bitcoin bonds that I designed for El Salvador. But I think it's a very different beast if the US is issuing Bitcoin-backed debt compared to a developing country. It actually may preclude the ability for any developing nation to issue a Bitcoin bond at this point, because US debt is the safest debt, right? It's from the money printer itself. It's not a derivative, and it's very hard to default on that debt. So it's like, in terms of Bitcoin bonds, that's like AAA rated, right? Then everything else is downstream of that. But I think it's a valid strategy, and it's probably the most reasonable thing the US could do at this point. Maybe I would increase it from 10 to 20%, but we'll see what happens. I think this is further out there. the Bitcoin bill will likely pass first, creating the reserve, and then this will probably come later. But everything seems to happen faster these days, so who knows? I believe we'll see this sort of game play out where gold is demonetized in favor of Bitcoin, simply for that reason that you outlined. I think Saylor said the same thing, that you can kind of like take out your enemies that have been buying gold by dumping gold and buying Bitcoin, especially if you have more Bitcoin, right? So it's just a balance. Like, does the US have more Bitcoin or more gold? And do they see the Bitcoin as more valuable or the gold is more valuable? And I think another thing that we forgot to talk about the EO was this will now allow us to actually figure out exactly how much Bitcoin the US has, because there's a number that's often thrown out there of 200 to 220,000 Bitcoin. 95,000 is going back to Bitfinex, and the rest we don't know. The US Marshals have kind of said we don't know. So the biggest thing I think for the EO is really that we're going to find out exactly how much they have, and that might lead to us finding out how much everyone else has, because every number out there is largely an estimate or approximation. Because China too, like right now, if you're going by general public disclosures, the US has less than China. China has 194,000. But there are also theories that China sold it, because there are some announcements in Chinese news that they disposed of some crypto assets. They didn't say Bitcoin, but they said we will dispose so much $billion of yuan, and this much billions of yuan, and this department will dispose this much. But we don't know. But if the U.S. comes out and says, "Here's our attestation," here's a signed message from the key that controls this, then I think other countries will start to need to verify how much they have. Otherwise, you don't really believe that at this point. Trust in government is at an all-time low globally. So I think there will be a race for more transparency, which is good for everybody. The whole point of this stuff is soft power projection, right? And projection of economic power. You kind of want people to know how much gold you have, right? Generally. And like you said, you can't really prove how much gold you have, and we actually don't know. So this is a very simple, low-cost, highly effective way to prove how much Bitcoin you have. And it's going to be the norm, I think, that every country is going to say, here's our holdings. Look at how powerful we are. I mean, with money being information now because of Bitcoin, it's really hard to enforce. Like, capital controls are also gone, right? They've been gone for 16 years now with the dawn of Bitcoin. But that's not really talked about. You still pretend that capital controls exist. But are capital controls effective? That's a question you have to ask yourself, because there's a lot of Chinese-owned real estate in the U.S. Like, how'd that money get there? You can only send $50,000 out per year, right? Under the current capital control scheme. So are they that effective? Are sanctions that effective? How hurt is Russia from being sanctioned to hell? I don't know. I don't think they're that effective. So it's a tool I believe that politicians like to wave around and say, yeah, we'll sanction you, but does it really work? I don't think so. So does it really matter at this point if you have permissionless money? And that reduces the threat of a sanction that doesn't work. You have to draw your own conclusion from that. All of those institutions are definitely going to fight back, because you're cutting off their livelihood, right? Like, they are sort of like central banks. They can print their own money. The IMF with the special drawing rights, right? That's basically printed money. So, like, when we talk about money printing, it's not just like physical printing of bills. Like, all of this is printing of money, right? It's increasing the money supply everywhere. And yeah, it's their, you're cutting off their job, so they're going to hate it, really. So I don't really see any way around that. You have these institutions that are very entrenched, very influential and powerful, and you're kind of chopping off their ability to do what they do. So they're going to fight it until the end. But if you're talking about just central banks, I think there really has to be a moment of reckoning where you ask the people there, like, are you thinking about this for your own benefit or for the benefit of the country? And if it is for the benefit of the country, they have to acknowledge that they need Bitcoin, and they should just hold Bitcoin. They can still exist and just, do whatever they want to do, but they should hold Bitcoin, right, and pretend to manage monetary policy and inflation. But for the other ones, like the IMF and World Bank, I think it's a much more difficult battle because they're not really accountable to anybody, right? It's like a collective group that funds them, and they have no accountability whatsoever. Last I heard that they passed the resolution that would allow them to buy Bitcoin and keep it on their balance sheet. So I don't know if they did it yet, but I think it's really a test. Like, technically, the central bank, well, in the case that the Federal Reserve is not federal, but generally central banks are part of the government, right? They're an extension of the government, and they control monetary policy. But it's really a question of are they treasonous or not? And maybe we should meme this into existence. But if they're denying Bitcoin, it's kind of attacking the country and betraying the country, because it's not in the best interest for them of the country for them to block Bitcoin adoption, right? They should simply look for valuable assets to stabilize the economy and maintain purchasing power and all their normal charter goals. So I think the Czech bank passes the test. They're actually looking at it objectively and with logic, rather than behaving emotionally and lashing out against Bitcoin, which happens very often. But if you want to find betrayal, there's betrayal everywhere. Even the Bank of Canada sold off all of Canada's gold. And you have to ask yourself, why would you do that? In what world or universe where you're acting in a responsible manner for effectively the finances of the country do you do something like that? What we found is that most governments, most politicians, they are very conservative. And there's this concept of career risk that's talked about a lot, at least in corporate adoption. I think Saylor's mentioned it too, but it applies to politicians as well, right? Nobody wants to take career risk. And they don't yet understand that not adopting Bitcoin is the career risk now. And that's what we're trying to educate them on. But by and large, they all are waiting for when from their perspective, it's zero career risk. And by definition, that means the US has not just done the executive order, but passed the Bitcoin Act and is actively accumulating. And Bitcoin is now at 500,000 or 0.5 M. That's when they think it's zero career risk. So it could be that we have to wait for that to happen before everyone piles on. And I think when that happens and everyone piles on, that's when you shoot up to 1 million or 10 a coin. Because nobody wants Bitcoin when it's at 80. Maybe not even at 108. Maybe not even at 200. They want it at 0.5 M. The IMF's motivation is to keep lending, right? And I don't really see the Trump admin being able to intervene specifically on the behalf of El Salvador and say, they just yank that out. I could be wrong, but I think Trump would rather keep a bargaining chip for something else in the future. That's just my take on his business style, so to speak. But there's a lot going on in terms of Bitcoin adoption right now in El Salvador, and there's a lot of confusion as to what exactly is happening. And I think there is a lack of communication, and that leads to a lot of speculation from Bitcoiners because we love to not trust and verify. So, people are asking, how can you reconcile the agreement with the IMF and that continued stacking or adding or buying of Bitcoin that they're publishing? And, we don't have a clear answer, but President Bukele has said it doesn't stop. It referring to the buying indirectly. But I don't know. I can't figure it out myself because I read through the agreement and it is very ironclad about what can or cannot be done. And there are only a few loopholes that are available. One is that it's a transfer, an internal transfer from a non-public wallet. I think that's Joe Nakamoto's thesis. And then second is that it's a donation. A third is that they are not past the deadline yet. There are multiple deadlines in the agreement and they can still buy, and it's not yet at the deadline. But the president said it doesn't stop ever, so that kind of precludes that one. Another one is that the reserve is private funds, not public, but then that doesn't really make sense either because they've said it's a public reserve. So yeah, I really don't know the answer at this point, and I think a lot of people are just wondering too, but there definitely is a conflict there. And it's almost made worse because the IMF released a statement saying that El Salvador is compliant with the agreement, right? So I think the answer is nobody knows right now. And you just have to kind of trust that they can keep going.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to access my free daily crypto updates and expert predictions direct to your inbox.